Here we have a 1998 Mercedes-Benz CLK320. This is the W208 3.2 liter V6. It has some sort of oil leak in the front of the engine, and we're going to try to track that down. Two things making it difficult to do that are the fact that it does not lose oil while it is sitting still. It only loses oil while it is running, and the radiator fan is blowing the oil all over the front of the engine. Let's see if you can see better down there. There's the alternator covered in oil. It's even caused a brand new serpentine belt to slip off of that main roller there. That serpentine belt is about a week old and it's already toasted. So the oil is most likely coming from up top somewhere and finding its way down to everywhere else, including the fan itself. So what I'm going to do is try to make this video as short as possible by pausing it while I'm doing the easy stuff. First, I'm going to take this cover off and clean it. It pops right off. It has a handle here, and there are 4 rubber clips there, there, and there. Be careful and make sure you pull it in the right spot, or else you might end up with a crack like that. So I'll pull that off and be right back. Okay, now this cover was just recently cleaned thoroughly, and as you can see, the oil spatter coming from the front, blowing it back. That's how we know the oil leak is coming from the front. Now, if you look underneath, this is where the oil filter housing is. It's all concentrated in this area. So we're going to, again, completely clean and degrease this, which we'll get to in a minute. I'll show you the mounting points here, here, right above the coil pack, here, and then there's one here. That's for the engine cover. So this is what you're going to see when you remove your engine cover. Get a little bit better idea of how bad this oil leak is just by looking at all of that. So again, I'm going to clean that, and then we'll move on to the next step. Before we go any further, I do want to mention there are a couple links I'll put in the description for the YouTube video. A couple guys that really helped a lot with this. So I'm assuming this oil leak is coming from somewhere around the top of the engine, which is also where some of the well-known oil leaks come from, because you can see here, that's oil on the airbox that's being blown on it from the fan here, which is covered in oil. And as high up as you go, you can see oil up until about there. So I'm starting from the highest point and working my way down, especially since it's not losing oil when the engine is off. It tells me that oil pressure is pushing it out somewhere. So the next step will be to remove this fan shroud here, which has 2 clips, one here and one here. That holds the shroud on. This is for the condenser. You don't have to worry about that. These pop off, and then they have 2 slots down underneath, so it'll just pull right out. You have to watch out for your radiator hose lines. Upper radiator hose, obviously. This goes to the expansion tank over there. I was going to wait to do this until I replace the thermostat, but my cooling system is fine. So I'm just going to most likely pop the hose off here, and possibly here as well, because the shroud can get hung up on this. You're also going to need to remove this little part to the airbox. This is just a little cold intake duct. So we'll get started on that and then be back with you. Okay, now that the engine's cool, and important, make sure the engine's cool, I'm going to relieve the pressure, any excess pressure from the overflow tank. That way nothing explodes on you. I'm going to remove the upper radiator hose from the thermostat housing here. I think I'm also going to remove it from the radiator itself here. Both have clamps. And then I'm going to leave this hose attached. It pops out here and here. They have two little clips. That one's broken, it looks like, so we'll just leave it on there. But I'll leave it attached to the reservoir. We're just going to take this up and pull it off. Okay, now we got this off here and here, so we're just going to take the whole thing, pick it up, and just move it right over there. That way it'll sit nice and neat. Sometimes it's good to tighten the clamps back up a little bit so they don't slide off. That's your choice. So now we have all this access here, and that will also keep the fan shroud from grabbing on the hose. And this here just pops out. You just pull that out like that. It's just a little air duct. Now that that's done, I'm going to take a look around and then again take this fan shroud off. These clips pull right up, right here, just the two clips. Then the electrical connector here, and that should be it. Should slide right out. Okay, so we have the fan and the fan shroud out now. Like I said, it's pretty easy. You have here and here is where it hooks into at the bottom. Just these little rubber grommets. And then those clips here and here, which look just like this. They just, get some light. They slide right on, or better, like that. They slide right on there. I just used a good old screwdriver to get underneath them and wiggle them up a little bit. They came off pretty easy. But this is what the fan and shroud look like together. As you can see, it's covered in oil all over here, so I'm going to have to clean all of this off. I'd be careful with what you clean the motor in there with. I use electrical cleaner for that, but the rest of this you could probably just use degreaser or a rag or whatever you want with. I'll show some of the products that I use to clean with, but here's how it fits inside the car. This is the part that goes up against the radiator itself. These are where the clips go, and then these are the slots. They go down into the bottom. Pretty straightforward. So I'm going to clean this off, and then we'll take a better look at the engine. Okay, so I've cleaned the engine facing side of the radiator fan housing, and I did it with I used these blue shop rags. I didn't use any chemicals. Worked out really well, actually. You can use whatever you want. Again, just mind the electronics. I'm going to spray this out with electronic cleaner, even though I don't think I need to. Then we will be cleaning the inside of this, and then on to the next. So here's the back of the fan shroud and fan. Wasn't very dirty. Just cleaned it up a little bit. And that gave the motor time to dry out. Okay, so the rain started to come down a little harder. I had to move it in a bit. But here's what we have with the fan shroud removed and the hoses. Again, there's your upper radiator hose. I just moved it to the back, left it connected there. That's where your intake plastic piece goes in there. But now we have a lot more room to look around. Here's your connector. Don't forget about that. That's for your radiator fan. But as you can see down here, I just cleaned this fan shroud a day or two ago, and it's already covered in oil again. And now that we have room, that's the alternator. Look how bad. And I cleaned that the other day as well. I sprayed that down with cleaner, and it's already disgusting again. See all of this oil down here? There's your power, your AC alternator, AC compressor, your power steering pump, and then your tensioner pulleys. Now, if you look, the oil keeps coming up and up and up and stops right around this area. Sorry, I don't have, the light's not very good. There we go. So I follow the oil all the way up. And the easiest thing to say is, oh well, it's valve cover gaskets. But the valve cover gaskets seem to look pretty good. Most of it's concentrated around here, which are where apparently the most common W208 V6 engine leaks are, oil leaks are. Right here, the assembly for the oil filter and oil cooler. This right here is supposed to be one of the spots, and I think there's oil coming from somewhere around this tensioner pulley here. So what I'm going to do next is take the serpentine belt off, and if you decide to do that, make sure you see how it is routed. From my understanding and from my experience, it's easiest to start over here at your AC compressor and then work your way down. As you can see, there's the route it takes. If you do decide to remove the serpentine belt, I use a 17mm socket with a 1/2 inch extension breaker bar, and that's going to go right here by the crank. The bolt for the tensioner right there. I'll try to film myself taking it off. So I degreased the tensioner nut right there. I'm going to put this 17mm on it. You really want it standing straight up. That's it right there. There. So you can see it's right at about 2 o'clock on the balancer. So I'm going to go ahead and turn counterclockwise, and you'll see the tensioner release. Remember how the belt goes on. Now I'm going to stop the video and take this off real quick. Before you take your serpentine belt off, or actually when you take your upper radiator hose off, you might want to take this clip out. This goes right in there, pops right out. It holds the upper radiator hose in. I broke mine, and I just super glue it together when I was taking the serpentine belt off. Easily avoidable, but one of those things that just happens. So, word to the wise. Okay, now the serpentine belt is off. You can see pretty much everything you need to see. You can see all that oil down there, starting from the bottom and working your way up. It's everywhere. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to degrease the entire front of the engine before I do anything else. I'm going to cap the thermostat housing with the radiator hose. I'm just going to take the hose that actually goes on it and pop it on there facing up. Oh, I actually tighten these down so I don't lose them. If you do happen to lose one and it slides somewhere down there or something like that, a coat hanger with a little hook on it works really well. So let me put that on and then we'll get back to it. Okay, now we have the hose on. As you can see, I just put it on and tilted it up to protect the cooling system. Now it's time to degrease the front of the engine. An important thing to note here is that it would probably be most wise to disconnect your battery if you haven't already. It's typically best practice to disconnect your battery before you work on pretty much anything. I'm going to use just your generic SuperTech engine degreaser. Make sure you follow the instructions because it's really not supposed to be on certain things like electrical components. I'm going to cover that air duct right there, obviously in the water system. So I'm going to degrease all of this. This is a foaming degreaser. Those tend to work the best. And let that soak for a while, then we'll be back with the results from that. So I just sprayed my engine bay and this is what it looks like. I might have went a little overboard with it, but there's grease everywhere, so if I damage a component, then I'll deal with it. I also intend to clean all of the electrical components with CRC electrical cleaner after this, so for anybody that plans on soaking their engine like this, you might want to think about those things, because this is the first time I've done this to this engine and I don't know what is going to come of it. And I'm not the type that's afraid to make mistakes. But at the same time, it's nice to try and do it the right way the first time. Easier said than done, of course. Alright, we'll be back after we let this soak. Okay, here we are after the first degreasing. The directions say to rinse it with water, but water conducts electricity because of the minerals in it. In reality, water is an insulator, and that's what distilled water is. It's water without minerals in it, and that's actually what they use in lead-acid batteries. Your typical car battery has water in it. I don't have any distilled water, so I used brake clean, which is not necessarily advisable. I'm not saying you should do that, but I was being a bit impatient. A lot of what I was seeing was coming from right where I expected, which is right about here. A lot of buildup in this area, and this is a known issue with this engine, this seal in here. I haven't opened it up yet. I'm going to degrease it again. So you've got your oil filter housing here, and then your oil cooler. Okay, I've finished cleaning the engine as best as I'm gonna. I did 2 coats of engine degreaser. I wiped everything down as best I could, and then I cleaned all the electrical components with electrical cleaner. I'll tell you what, if you have a compressor, it would really help. I actually just sold mine because I didn't think I needed it anymore, of course. So now, what I'm going to do, all these parts that were caked are now relatively clean. I don't know how well you can see in there. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to take this hose and reattach it, fill the oil up to the proper level, and then put the serpentine belt back on and run the car idle without the fan in it and see if I can spot the leak anywhere. Okay, I got the serpentine belt back on. You can see how chewed up it is. We're going to use this one because I have another new one that I'm going to use once I finally get this solved. But the serpentine belt's back on. Next, I'm going to put the upper radiator hose back on. And if you do this, make sure the oil's filled to the proper level. I've let it sit for a while to make sure it's not leaking oil while sitting still. And I'm going to fill the reservoir, the coolant reservoir, with regular water because the next thing I'm going to do is replace the thermostat and flush the cooling system. But typically you don't want to use regular water in your cooling system because it can cause rust if you due to the minerals in it. If you're going to put water in your cooling system, it should be distilled water along with coolant, or you can just buy the 50-50 pre-mixed solution. So I'm going to put the hose back on, make sure that all of the fluids are at the proper level, and then we'll fire it up and see if we can find a leak. Okay, everything is back together now. Coolant tank is full, hose is on, serpentine belt's on. We have everything except for the fan, so if oil comes out it won't be able to blow anywhere. We should be fine, and we're not going to let it get too hot, and it's fairly cool outside anyway. The water pump should take care of engine cooling. So now let's go ahead and fire it up. Let's see where we get. We're going to keep our eyes in this area here and everywhere else. Well, it looks like we found it, and it's exactly where I thought it was going to be. Right here. Okay, so here our problem is right here. Right underneath the oil filter housing. That's called the expansion plug gasket. It goes on like that. It uses 2 reverse torques, also known as stars, 2 little bolts. I used an 8mm socket to get them off, which you can do as long as you're gentle. Don't strip anything out. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to put some gasket maker around this and around here and make my own gasket, because this seems to be a very common problem with the W208. Now, testing it the way I did, I wasn't able to drain the oil, so as I'm sure you can imagine, when I took that off, we got some oil poured out of here. Not a crazy amount, but enough to make me have to clean up again. Luckily it was clean oil, so I cleaned all of that off, and right now I have a shop paper towel stuck in there to keep it dry while I put some gasket maker on there and let it cure a little bit. Now if you do this, don't forget to remove that before you put the cover back on. So here's the actual seal that fits in there like that. What I've noticed is that tiny little crack, even though it was sealed in there. This engine was losing about a quart of oil over a 10-mile drive under normal driving circumstances. A very cheap solution, but a very expensive problem. Definitely good to know. So we're going to seal this back up, put it all together, and see how it turns out. So here it is back in. Let's get it right. That's it right there. Got it sealed up finger tight right now. We're going to wait for that to cure. Then we'll tighten it up Then we'll let it set 24 hours. And then we'll run it and see if it fixed all of our problems. Hopefully that's the only one. Okay, it's day 2. I've put everything back together. Fan shroud's back on. Upper radiator hose is back on. Intake duct is back on. Serpentine belt's back on. Now, overnight, it appears as though... Where are we at? There it is. As you can see right there, we don't appear to have any leakage at all. The sealant says to wait 24 hours to let it cure. I've let it be. It's been about 18 hours. I think I'm going to go ahead and fire it up anyway. It should be alright. I've filled the coolant reservoir up. I'm leaving the cap off, and I'm going to turn the heater on so the water pump can circulate as much as possible and get as much air out as possible. That's not going to hurt the engine if you want to do that. That'll keep it from pressurizing. And then once you know it's full, you can put the cap on. And once I've verified that, we'll put the engine cover back on and we should be good to go. The oil is at the perfect level, and everything's about as clean as it's going to get. So let's see what happens. Okay, we're all finished. I don't see any oil leaking from that particular spot. Let's hope I don't have any more leaks anywhere. Since I didn't disconnect the battery before doing this, I'm going to disconnect it now in order to reset all of the electronics. Best practice is to disconnect your battery before doing any work to any vehicle. I had my own reasons for leaving it connected for this. But please remember that this is all for informational purposes only. I am not a Mercedes mechanic, nor am I claiming to be an authority on any of what I've done. I hope this helped somebody.